everyone, and welcome to Between the Prompts, where AI meets research, the show where we explore how AI is reshaping research. I'm Vanessa.
And I'm Lauren, and we are both researchers who are curious, sometimes skeptical, and often excited about how AI is showing up in research.
In each episode, we dive into a topic that's on our minds, and probably on yours too, whether you're a student, a faculty member, or just trying to make sense of all the AI buzz.
Today, we're going to be talking about some of the pitfalls of using AI in research. So we called this episode Caution, Danger Ahead.
Why do we start with the negative? I mean, I guess we're both naturally skeptics, and we do tend to be risk averse when it comes to research.
As we should be. So let's break this down.
Okay. I think there are a lot of reasons to be careful or take a moment to pause and ask yourself if you should be using AI in your research. Let's start with data privacy. What are your thoughts about AI and data privacy, Lauren?
Some of my stuff in this area is really related to human subjects, right? I really think about the things about like how their personal data is being collected, stored, and then used to train these AI models. So that's one of the concerns I have. And are these people going to have any sort of meaningful control over their data, or do we have control over that data? I really think about that potential for AI systems to infer sensitive information, even for like seemingly innocuous data. So those are some of the things I've been really thinking about related to human subjects.
That bit about inference you just mentioned reminds me of that story that spread all around on social media about Target figuring out that a teenager was pregnant, before the family knew. And, certainly that's one of the powerful things about AI because it works with patterns and then making predictions based on those patterns. And so it can be really insightful in some ways, or at least offer up some really interesting connections for us to try to see if we think that they're good connections or not. But you're right. I mean, what happens if you feed your data that we've been told for years that we have to store in secure locations and safeguard in multiple ways, and suddenly you put it out into this system that is learning from the patterns in your data? That is a little bit scary. And I think that connects into protecting our intellectual property as well, because I think about whether if I've made a really interesting connection between a few thoughts, between a few theories, whatever it is, I have a unique thesis that I want to put out into the world. I worry that if I put all of that into AI, that AI is going to get trained on that and make it a recommendation later on to somebody else.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And that's something I've really been thinking about lately is just what we're feeding into these systems, how they're being trained, and then how they're going to be using that. So totally get where you're coming from there. But I want to switch topics a little bit. So something that I think that gets talked about a lot related to AI is hallucinations. So have you seen any examples in hallucinations related to research?
Absolutely. Actually, the first time I decided I was going to play with AI and just see what it could do, I came up with a big hallucination. I had these 4 reflections that my co-researchers and I had written, and I wanted to see how we were similar and how we were different. I fed the 4 reflections in, and I wrote a prompt about coming up with the 5 major points made in each reflection, and then trying to find the commonalities and the differences. And I had to feed them in one document at a time. So I put the first one in and said, can you summarize this person's reflection and come up with the 5 major points about it? Then I put the second one in, asked it to do the same, and asked it to compare it. So when I put the second one in, and it was talking about these people's research, it started to tell me that the second person did research on game-based learning. And I know this person pretty well. And I thought, no, they don't do research on games, game-based learning, nothing in that area. So I was quite puzzled. And then it continued to talk about that person and game-based learning. I went back to the original documents. I searched through them for any mention, even of the word game in any context, and it simply wasn't there. So I don't know what happened. I don't know if the person's first name triggered a connection in the system with, their name and other topics that they brought up with regards to research, and it connected into somebody who does game-based learning. I honestly have no idea, but it was really strange.
That is strange. And I think one of the really concerning things about that is it may not have even made a connection. It might have just made that up. You know what I mean? And I think it's like the fact that these systems can do that, it is terrifying. And that brings me to an interesting conversation I had. So I was having a conversation with a university librarian. So for all of you researchers out there, definitely tap into your either college librarian, university library system. They are super helpful with research. But we were talking about literature reviews. And so she was telling me that she had been getting emails from faculty about articles that they couldn't find in the library system. And so, she was doing all of these searches and kind of the more advanced things that our fantastic librarians can do. And she was saying that these articles didn't exist. And so when she went back to some of the faculty and asked, where did you find this? They said that it was presented to them in AI when they were doing research about specific topics. So, people are putting these sources that do not exist into research papers. And I know it's not just faculty. I know there's other people doing it out there too. And so that's just really scary to think about, that it's just like creating these sources. And as a researcher myself, like, what could it be creating that I wrote that I actually had nothing to do with?
I actually think that's kind of funny to see the things that it might come up with as hallucinations and attribute to me. Maybe I've written some fantastic things I don't even know about. Maybe it's going to suggest to me the thing that I should be writing about next, right?
Ooh.
Because it's all about the patterns and predictions. So
love that.
I hadn't thought about that. I hadn't thought about that before, but maybe I'm going to go on later today and say, okay, you know me. What are the next 5 studies that you think I should do? Or if I were to write a thought piece, what should it be? But aside from that, okay, so that's how we could use this for good. But like the whole danger, caution ahead part of our focus for today, I suggest that this is problematic and that people aren't attending to it. I don't know if it's just because there's so much pressure on people to work at a very fast pace, or if people have a mistaken sense of trust in the technology, that just because it's available to us and it's been talked about so much, and we know that there are many good things and helpful things that it can do for us, that they just want to believe that everything is good and helpful? Or are we talking about a real ethical issue here and highlighting that ethical issue for all to see? Because I'll tell you, whenever I'm playing around and it suggests something to me, I always go find the source. But, well, you know me. I have always been a stickler for having the source. I tell my students again and again, do not cite something if you do not have it in your hands, or I guess on your laptop these days. But if you do not have it in your hands and you have not passed your eyes over it and thought about it with your own brain, you should not be citing it.
And read more than the abstract, not just the abstract. Read the article.
Yes, absolutely. Read the article. And back when I was doing my master's thesis, and really everything was finding sources in the library, making endless photocopies of things so I could take them home to read them using interlibrary loan. I remember doing this hunt for a particular piece. I remember doing a hunt for another piece. It's funny how these pieces that are elusive stick with you. But things that I had seen other people citing and I knew they existed, but I couldn't find them in my library and I wasn't easily getting them through interlibrary loan. And I started to wonder, where and how did this exist in the first place? And who actually has a copy? Who actually read it? And how many people didn't read it and are just using carryover citations of it and not even doing secondary citations, because we know those are discouraged. So I see that as being part of this problem now for getting resources that are hallucinated and people just wanting to say, yeah, that's what I'm looking for. I'll stick it in my paper.
Yeah, absolutely.
But also with the hallucinations, I want to bring up the issue of how, okay, even when we're not in the realm of getting sources for something. We may be asking it to just do a particular task for us. I've noticed that it starts to slip over time. So I can give a very concrete set of directions, and then I can ask it to continue to execute the same thing 5, 6, 7, 24 times. With a human being, I always expect that they will get better and better as they get more used to executing the directions. But what I've noticed with AI is that the third or fourth time around, it seems to forget some of the details from the original directions. Have you noticed anything with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's a really interesting point you bring up. So I think one of the things that I've really noticed the most, especially when you get into these like long prompted, quote unquote, conversations with an AI chatbot, is sometimes the context starts to slip away. So I know I'm deviating from research a little bit, but sometimes I'll use AI to support my teaching. So maybe creating like rubrics or assignment instructions just to help me think about alignment. But the longer these conversations get, it seems to almost forget what it is it's doing, and then it'll kind of make something up to kind of to fix itself. You know what I mean? So it's like I'll be doing something for example, in like evaluation and instructional design, and then it'll switch over completely to something different. And so that's a little disconcerting, knowing that it just kind of stops using that correct context. And so what does that even mean for research when we are asking it to do things like analyzing data? And, it can't even account just context. Context is key when we think about research. And, it can't even do things like understand those nuances and really get that information out of those interpretations. So, so what happens there? And I know that's a really big question that we can't necessarily answer now, but it's something that I'm really concerned about.
I agree with you. And I think that these inconsistencies can be really troubling. I have found even just asking it to take files, and I'm not even talking about research files, but just files I have of things that are a little bit messed up and I want them to be processed and output in a slightly different form. And it will do fine for the first one, the second one, the third, and then the fourth one, it starts to forget some of the things that I asked it to do, or it changes the form that I've asked for. And I've gone back in and tried to replicate with the initial prompt that I used, even that seemed to work so well. And that prompt is no longer working. So this is a slippery slope of its ability to continue to teach itself based on patterns, but then it goes in directions that I didn't ask it to. Mm-hmm. So it's not being fully compliant. And that part of it I find a bit dangerous. But so I'm going to switch the topic again. What do you think about algorithmic bias?
Yeah, so that's just something that's been on my mind with AI. When AI or generative AI as we know it was kind of in its infancy, I was at a conference and someone was talking about how, they were doing an AI prompt and said that they were female and talking about the kind of job that they wanted. And AI kind of came out and said, oh, well, you should be a teacher. You should be, these very kind of, as you would say, historically like female focused jobs. But when they switched their gender to male, it's like, oh, you should be an engineer. You should be all these different. So it's really interesting just kind of how that works. But, I really worry about just our vulnerable populations in research. Like, that data being used to develop commercial AI products without any sort of benefit sharing for these people. AI embeds a lot of assumptions that could misinterpret these vulnerable populations. So we do see those biases, and those issues. And, so that's again, something that's in the back of my head when it comes to using AI for research.
Even with not so vulnerable populations, this is a funny one that I heard somebody mention recently. There was some sort of like campus life survey, and someone asked AI to do a quick pass through the survey just to, give some initial thoughts about themes. And there was an open-ended item that somebody had made a comment about alcohol and whatnot on campus. And that was about the extent of the reference. And AI coded it as Greek life.
Ah.
yeah, so it went right there because it said that's a pattern that I recognize, but that shows its algorithmic bias because the commenter didn't actually say anything about Greek life. And we both know, being on campuses, that while alcohol can be associated with Greek life, it is certainly not exclusively associated with Greek life.
Yeah, that's a really interesting, that's such an interesting example. So, just keeping up with our time here, I kind of have a burning question for you. So for those of you listening who don't know, Vanessa is currently an editor and has been a journal editor for some very prestigious journals in our field. So I'm really interested to hear from you about AI and acceptability within the journals.
Oh gosh, AI has really pushed us to think about what we're doing in journals from every angle. So from the perspective of authorship, it's not acceptable. You can't have AI as a co-author because co-authors need to be able to consent. In fact, some journals will actually email all of your co-authors when you submit an article, waiting for you to click a button and say, yes, I approve of this submission to go forward, because that's usually one of the standards of a field in publication, that all co-authors agree about something being submitted for publication. But AI is not able to give that consent. It's not a human. So many journals have come down on the side of AI is not acceptable as a co-author. So what do you do if AI has produced some of the work? That's a real challenge. Journals are trying to set some guidelines around when it may or may not be acceptable to use AI. So is it okay to use Grammarly to help clean up your language a little bit? Or if you're going to use generative AI, perhaps for some of the modeling that you're doing, or for generating a figure, perhaps that's acceptable. But is it acceptable to have it completely write your piece? Maybe not. And that means that authors need to read carefully what the journals are saying for their current guidelines, and in some cases need to declare in what ways generative AI was consulted. And the flip part of this is on the side of the reviewer, because you do have to worry about peer reviewers taking an article and plopping it into an AI tool. And at that point, they don't have that personal, strong connection to the piece. So they might not care so much whether they are putting it into an enterprise system where it shouldn't be going out there and feeding the beast, so to speak, for continued learning based on somebody else's intellectual property, or if they're just putting it out into any old AI tool where it can be used for continued AI training. That is a big issue. And I have heard reviewers accuse authors of having AI do at least a portion of their writing. And I have heard authors accuse reviewers of using AI to do reviews. And I have seen cases where I've suspected both, but just like it is on the teaching and learning side, where we don't have an easy way to prove that a student used AI to write a paper unless they perhaps left in some of the markers of AI, like the dialogue at the beginning or end. We don't have anything that we can really do about that. We just continue to discourage it. We can reject something for poor writing, for, using these generalities that we shouldn't be using. But yeah, that's kind of where that sits. It's still uncharted territory. We're getting better at dealing with it. I would advise authors to be really cautious and think about it before they use AI too liberally in their work. And I would encourage reviewers to not accept the review if they're not planning on doing it themselves.
I think that's really good advice. So thanks for talking on that point. So we've gone over a lot of negative, but we also know there can be positive when it comes to AI and research. So what does this mean for our listeners, Vanessa?
I think it means that we just proceed with caution. We don't just jump right in. We're not uncritical about it. We don't trust the tech to do the right thing. We need to always remember, we run the technology. We shouldn't let the technology run us or run our study. And on that note, as we think about running our studies, where do you think we should go next with this podcast, Lauren?
So let's start at the very beginning. Let's start with developing research ideas.
Ooh, that's one of my favorite phases of research, the ideation phase. Okay, so developing research ideas it is. Join us again the next time as we go between the prompts.